Welcome to the Life You're Made For with me, Dr. Heather Penny. We're going to be having conversations that talk about us spiraling up versus spiraling down, because we all want to be living lives that are about thriving, not just surviving. This is the life you're made for. So let's get going. Hello, Lisa. It's good to have you on my show today.
Hi, Heather. I'm super excited to be here. Always love talking with you.
Yes. And for our listeners, this is Dr. Lisa Smith. And we are getting to talk for the second time because she was such a dynamic interviewer that I had last time. And I wanted to make sure that I had her as one of my endorsers for Grace Space. So, and I love her perspective on it. And I love her, really the role she's playing in this world on it. So thank you for endorsing my book, Lisa. And thank you for just supporting the message out there. And I thought, who better to have on as you are working with this next generation? And this is a lot of what I'm thinking about when I wrote Grace Space of how do we leave this world a better place? So before we jump into the conversation, let's remind our listeners a little bit of who you are and what you do.
All right. Well, I teach English at Pepperdine University, which is in Malibu, California. I teach specifically in the field of early American literature. So actually, there's a lot more diversity in that field than you might think. A lot of different writers, a lot of writers who are not writing literature as we think of it, like short stories and novels and stuff, but they're writing about their own lives. Spiritual journals, narratives of settlement, indigenous peoples are writing encounter narratives. So there's a lot going on in terms of being able to connect with people's lives. And I love bringing that to the students because they can really connect with it, even though we're separated by several hundred years. They like reading people's authentic accounts of what they've experienced, even if it's a different time period. So that's really fun to teach. I also do writing and work in the area of early American writing. I've done some stuff with the First Great Awakening, which was a big religious revival that really kind of shifted thinking in America, letting people kind of have their own spiritual journeys. So that's a little bit what I do. And I live in California with my husband. I have 2 sons.
Yes. Oh, I love it. And I'm just a teeny weeny bit biased because my son goes to Pepperdine. So I love the education and experience he's getting. And I'm telling you, when I was on site, I was like, I want to go back to school.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I pretty much once a week, I just, put a picture up on Facebook of how gorgeous my workplace is just to make people jealous. Because why not if you can? That's what I think. Yeah, it's a great place to work.
Yeah. Those of you who don't know where Pepperdine is, it is in Malibu, California, and it is situated right on the coast. And so when the students are eating in the cafeteria, they literally have access to the Pacific coast there and just watching everything roll in. So it's it's a beautiful campus.
And the students are great. I mean, I'm really blessed to work there. They're really inquisitive, interesting, love to share their ideas. So it's fun.
Oh, well, let's jump into the conversation about Grace Space. Tell our listeners a little bit about just your thoughts on it and maybe some of the connections and how it really can support this new conversation that we're really trying to implement in our world right now.
Yeah, well, I like that phrase, new conversation, because that's a little bit of what, as an educator of young adults or emerging adults, that's a little bit of what I want to do. And you say in your book in the very beginning, you want to move beyond safe spaces to spaces you call more humane. And I think you have the phrase, bring out the best in all of us. So there's spaces that people don't just feel safe, but they feel encouraged and welcomed, and they can, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do as a college educator. I want students to come to college with their own ideas, and I want them to learn how to share those, but I also want them to be able to engage with new ideas. I want them to learn how to hear other people's ideas. The idea of civil discourse really is what we can probably call it. And that only happens in a grace space. That only happens in a place where, you mentioned in your practices, receptivity, freedom, trust, you need those pieces to create that space. And that's literally what I'm trying to do in the classroom. So when your book came to me, I was like, okay, I need this like yesterday. So I read it. It also dovetailed really perfectly with what we're working on as an institution at Pepperdine, and that is we're revamping some of our first year programming to create a class where students will be able to share freely and talk, learn critical thinking. Studies have shown, and you may have read these with your research, but studies have shown that people sometimes are afraid to share, and that's no different for college students, even though they're coming to a place where it's supposed to be a place where we have an exchange of ideas, and where we have civility and where we can welcome different opinions. The college students are afraid to say anything, because of how it might be received. And so I feel like your book is really hitting at a perfect time for us just in our society, of course, being an election year for that reason, in the workplace, but also in the classroom. And so that's more where I've kind of grabbed the gray space idea, the spaces between, as you say, between people, because that space between can be an amazing place where people can become the best they can be, but it can be a place where there's fear, or just tentativeness. They may not be used to it. So that's was sort of my initial excitement about getting into your book. For me personally, as an educator, and also I think it dovetails with what's happening in higher education, where we're trying to get back to creating a place for real civil discourse, I guess we'd say.
Right. I love your term civil discourse, because we can't do critical thinking when we are scared. And
yes. Perfect.
This is what I'm excited about. And it's so fun to hear all the different spaces that people are looking at utilizing this book. And of course, I work in business America. I work over here in nonprofits. I work in faith. And of course, I was thinking, this next generation, can we get it in front of this next generation where we put 7 practices out in front of them? And for those of you who are listening, about the phrase that Lisa referred to as spaces between, that's off of Dr. Parker Palmer, one of the greatest, my opinion, one of the greatest philosophers of our time right now. And he said, we need spaces within and spaces between that welcome the wisdom of the soul. Yeah. And we can't welcome wisdom. We can't even critically think if we are scared of a not only negative response, but really an aggressive or violent response. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. A book that I wrote a few years ago called Godly Characters looks at women in biblical times and how they made an impact on their environment and how they demonstrated certain traits. And I've just the last year started using that in my first year seminar, which is a class for freshmen, for first year students. And it goes through different traits that these women displayed: tenacity, faith, courage, that kind of thing. And it's anyone can really respond to it. And so what I usually ask the first year students is, what trait do you think is the most necessary right now for your generation? And interestingly, a lot of them pick courage.
Really?
For that exact reason, they feel like they have a lot to share. They've worked, they've developed, they've grown. I mean, this generation that's in college now came through COVID. So they're in some ways fairly mature. They did a lot of introspection. They thought about themselves. Students tell me all the time the hard work they did on themselves during COVID. And so they have a lot to share, but they want that courage to share it, that it will be welcomed and it will be received. And it's only been in the last year or so I've really seen that trait of courage kind of rise to the fore as what students across the board are wanting. And I don't think it's just in the classroom. I mean, I think it's kind of everywhere. And I think what we want to create for this generation is the opportunity to fail and still come back, right? That's another thing that we're struggling with as a society. Does one failure define you forever? And I did have to just think about your one chapter on trust that I know you think is really a key practice. You mentioned your example failing at your first public speaking engagement. And I think the phrase was you decided not to let fear roost. Right.
Yeah.
So you were like, no, okay, I can learn from this. And that's exactly what we want to develop for everyone, but especially for emerging adults. If we create a gray space, if they have the courage to try something new, to try something different, to engage with something they're not familiar with, do they have the freedom to fail? We've done that. You and I have done plenty of failing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And we know that we can come back from it. And so I think that's the piece that I'm hoping will really come across with gray spaces in the classroom, but across the board, that, you know what, you actually can fail. Your worst fear can happen, and yet there will still be a soft landing for you to go from and learn from. And you actually, I mean, as a life coach, you know this, Heather, right? This is, I'm sure, your bread and butter message. You can get better because of it.
Yes. Yeah.
That freedom to fail, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you brought that up, because it syncs up too with, and you were touching on this, that gray space is something we can hold within us. And it's also something that we offer. And I've always said that leadership starts from within. Leaders, to be a great leader in this world, we can't start with that courage space of being a better communicator or leading stronger. We have to start with that courage space and apply it personally and say, wait a minute, I've got to focus on internally giving myself grace to fail, giving myself the grace to learn. And then as I learn how to hold grace space, only therein can we authentically offer it. And so it's this duality of it's internal and it's external. But isn't that, going back to your original comment about failure, we have to be able to have the willingness to hold that personal space within us that says, this is who I am, this is who I'm becoming, and ultimately this is what I want to offer. But many of us we're still dealing with that fear. And honestly, you and I probably got to fail with not quite as big as a audience, like social media and everything else happening.
Exactly.
Some of these fails are pretty big. And I'm like, I don't know how I could have handled that at 15 or 18 or 25, you know?
No. Yeah,
so I don't know. Speak
right.
a little bit to that about the internal, external. I love what you brought that up.
Yeah, that's actually a lot of what I do, what I'm able to do in the classroom teaching early American literature. I'm able to look at people's lives. And you're exactly right that people will sometimes have repeated failures that they'll record for posterity, in their journals, in letters, until they reach that point where, like you said, that interior space, that space within becomes authentic and strong. And that can be through faith, religious faith. That can be through having several successes and learning from them. That can be through creating a sort of a tribe to support you. That can be through developing a skill set, right? So actually things you touched on in your other book about the life coach you're meant to be. But they get to that point, and then they do offer it to others. And it's a natural flow then. And okay, not to keep bringing up the 18th century. My husband says I spend too much time in my mind there. But one new class that I developed in the last year was on some of the religious and political movements in the 18th century. And we looked at a preacher named George Whitefield. And I ended up writing a book on him. But what intrigued the students about him was that he, in his journals, talks about his own struggles to decide if he wants to be a minister, to decide what kind of faith he wants, his own spiritual journey. Worked so hard at it that he actually got ill and had to leave college for a time to kind of recover.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But then what happened was he became one of the greatest preachers in the 18th century, and he was able to create grace space for large groups of people, which amazes me. He would have thousands come to hear his messages, and he would somehow be able to create an environment where everyone felt comfortable. And so what we read in class are people's writings about their encounters with him and how they now felt empowered to make their own choices on their faith journey, and their own decisions, and kind of grow themselves. So I actually didn't put it together until you just said it right there. But he was interesting in how he could create such a large gray space, but it came from his own hard work. And that's where I think you see this as a life coach, right? I mean, we're going to fail if we just want to do everything outward. Become a better leader, for me to become a better educator, become a better parent. I can read a book on parenting all I want, but until I do the hard work inside, it's not going to flow naturally. And so that's why I like that you have the balance, and actually your 2 books, and really your 3C living and learning leading, series, I think kind of hits that, because you say business, home, world, right? I mean, those you're kind of saying that it's got to start small and then it has to flow out. And that's what I think I'm trying to bring students in the classroom with examples from history, and then what you're trying to do in this book. But it's really necessary, and it's empowering. When you have reached a good point internally, it doesn't have to be perfect, and it will change as we age. But, for the 20-somethings I work with, I just try to encourage them. Who are you? What do you have? Bring that to the table, you know, and then those gray spaces with others kind of naturally are created.
Yeah, you're right on. And I think what I was seeing was just, again, fear was starting to trump all permission to explore personal identity, personal awareness. And instead of asking the most important question, which is, what do I think and feel and believe about this? We're starting to ask, and I see this with all of our different spaces, but particularly this new generation, what do they think about it? Or whatever tribe I associate with, what is the rhetoric or the propaganda that I'm supposed to support? And if I don't, I'm not standing up for what I believe. And what I'm challenging this new generation is that really what you believe? 1, and 2, is anyone giving you the courtesy to really help you stop and listen to it? Because if they're not, all you're doing is parroting somebody else. And typically, well, I have found this, it's usually the loudest, most aggressive voice in the room that we start parroting, because we get nervous that we're not pulling our weight or speaking up or having the courage. And I wanted to say, courage really starts with taking that time to understand what you think, believe, in your opinions, and then being able to put it in a way that allows other people to hear it, to join you in it, to have civil discourse in it, and to be able to really grow the collective clarity, not just be the loudest or angriest or fiercest voice in the room that's really just intimidating everyone else to identify what they think.
Yeah, it's a kind of bullying almost. And, as an educator, I think your book talks about, how we develop this ourselves, but your book also put some real truths out there and some real challenges I found to people who are leaders in different places. You're a parent, or even sometimes in a group of friends, or in a classroom, or in a business setting. And I have to say a couple things really sort of impacted my own educational practice from your book. I love the line in your chapter on freedom versus control. I found that to be really impactful, because as an educator in a classroom, I want to create freedom for people to share, right? And so I can learn certain things. I was really impacted. I think it was last summer when I took a part in a national program that's called SEED, Seeking Education, Equity, and Diversity. How am I, as a leader in the classroom, able to make it easier for people to step forward, to share, to enable their courage to happen? But I loved your chapter on freedom and control. You had one sentence. It was only 4 words, but I was like, okay, this is worth the price of admission. Control keeps things small. And in a lot of settings when we're leaders, we get nervous with releasing control. But it does open things up. And I'll tell you just one thing. I'm trying in the classroom this semester. We'll see if it works. The jury's still out. And I'm teaching an introduction class to women's and gender studies, which Pepperdine, that is not its own department. It's just interdisciplinary. So we all come from different disciplines and we teach it. So this is my first time teaching it. And we're looking at different topics that impact with women, with gender in general. We're looking at education, civic participation, sexuality in the body, all kinds of things that impact on that. And I decided I'm using an anthology. So we're doing certain readings, and we really want it to be a study of kind of history and what different people have thought on these topics. So we're using the anthology to look at writings throughout history, but I decided to let each student choose a subtopic in the class and bring in their own piece of writing. And it's really open. It can be an article, it can be a newspaper thing, it can be can be a podcast you listen to, a transcript from that, a blog post, like it can be really open, but I'm calling it current conversation. So where are these topics currently? I'm providing a lot in the class through history, but I wanted to give them a voice in what's happening right now. And some of them are very personally involved in these topics. So they're already listening to podcasts on it. They're already reading about it. So this is probably the first time in my teaching career that I've actually opened up the syllabus and said, okay, you guys each provide a writing that we're all going to read. You're going to help us through this piece of writing. You're going to tell us why it touched you, what you learned from it. You're going to lead a discussion. So I thought about that because that's hard. That piece of control, setting the syllabus is like, so to just kind of open that up, I don't know what they'll find. I've never even taught the course before. But I'm excited because it's exactly what you're saying. It's going to expand things, and they're not going to stay as simple as my readings that I've picked for the whole semester.
I love that you brought that up, and I'm really proud of myself for using that sentence. So thanks for reminding me of it.
Yeah,
Sometimes I forget what I wrote. But I think, a couple of things are just flooding my mind. As a leadership coach, I'm watching C-suite teams, those with high control. The company's vision is very small, and it's really led through a tremendous amount of intimidation and fear. The C-suite teams that really open up and aren't trying to focus on control, but really freeing their people to be a part of the solution. This is the ones that are gaining new traction, new ground, going after the competitive edge. And it's really powerful to watch. So I've watched that in the leadership spaces, but you'll notice that my book was dedicated to my son, Luke.
Yeah.
And we probably around, he was 15, he's 19 now, but we went through a bit of a roller coaster in our relationship. And I didn't realize some of the control I was having as a mother and trying to adjust and adapt to a young man. Yeah. And I'm not going to say I handled everything well, but I will say I just had an honest conversation with him, said, Luke, I've never been a mom before to a 15-year-old boy. If you can hang in there, clearly I'm missing something. But if you can hang in there, it's probably something to do with freedom and control. And I'm open to hearing what that is, because I don't want our relationship to stay small. And a way that a relationship stays small is you're battling for power all the time. Right. And I thought, I want my son to know that I believe in him and I trust in him. I have a mother's heart, and I'm worried about him not getting a cold and taking a jacket, or even like getting to the right university. So of course I've got all these things, but he's probably interpreting that as control, and he's not wrong. But how do we step into that space and create a gray space around us? And so, as you said earlier, that's why I use the tagline of creating spaces we want to live and lead in. As I was doing so much in the leadership realm, I was transferring gray space over into my personal life and working even just with my son. And I'm thrilled that he stayed in it with me and said, "You're doing it again, Mom." And I'm like, doing what? I'm doing the control. And how do I step into freedom? And I was like, you can say whatever you need to say to me, as long as it's respectful. You can say whatever you need to say to me. And so he was able to step into that space because I gave him that freedom to start really evaluating. This is feeling controlling, and I need to be able to find my words to talk about it. And I need to listen hard, because as a 15-year-old boy, of course, he's not going to match my words or my verbalness. So is the idea to run circles around him and keep him controlled by over verbalizing to him? No, it's to help set him free as he finds his words and as we figure out what he's needing as he matures into a young man.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent example. And that's why I think also, if you've ever read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, he talks about these 13 virtues that he wants to grow in. And he makes the case that these virtues build on each other. And as you're talking about freedom and control, that's a later chapter, right? I mean, one of your earlier chapters is receptivity versus defensiveness. And that's literally what you're saying. That freedom versus control, those conversations and that growth could not have happened if you were not acting on one of the first practices that you have, which is receptivity versus defensiveness. And I have to laugh because you shared a story in that chapter about your book launch and your husband having to go to a conference, I think.
Yes.
And I'm laughing because, the book I wrote recently on George Whitefield is actually launching next week, and my husband's going to be away. So
How dare they?
I know. I'm like, I need to buy this chapter. A friend's taking me. You were like, I got some friend. Well, a friend's taking me out to dinner. I'm like, okay, we'll do that. But I've seen too. I think the last point that you make about trust. I have seen that in the classroom, even in a one-on-one level, which you don't always think happens. I remember this was just maybe 2 years ago or so, 2 or 3 years ago, I had a first-year student in a writing class, and he was incredible. He was a great student. He was very prepared for the class. He was always in class, always listening. And one day he forgot his textbook. And I said something like, oh, don't have your materials today, or just like made a little joke.
Yeah.
And I could see it in his face.
Yeah.
I could see that I had like done the wrong thing. And my first thought was, oh, Gen Z, really? They can't even take a joke. Right?
Yeah.
But then later I thought about it and I was like, actually, he's a great student. He what I think matters to him. I said that kind of in front of everyone. I mean, it might have been like break time or something, but still other people heard it. Possibly heard it. And I thought, wow, Lisa, that was a big trust breaker, huge trust breaker. And it took all semester for me to kind of regain trust with that student. But I did it, and he, thankfully, we didn't have a conversation on that topic because I didn't think that was the best route, but he stayed in it, and he got back to really enjoying the class. But I noticed how, wow, it's easy to break trust if you're not thinking about it. And that was one real potent example for me, that I really felt bad about that. And I really worked to kind of rebuild that trust. But it comes from that receptivity versus defensiveness. All these practices that you have work together. And it's when you kind of combine them and when you grow slowly in each one that you can really, I think, see a difference.
You're right on, because as we all want to learn and grow, I practiced these for a couple of years before the book was even published. And it gave me language where whether it was with a fellow colleague or a leader that I was working with, or whether it was my son or my daughter or my husband, I could say, it sounds like I probably got a little defensive there, or I started accusing you and I'd like to have a redo. It's a term we have in our family. Can I have a redo?
That's great.
I'd like to move into questioning. Or it helps you own it, whether you actually verbalize and own it to the other person or just own it for your own personal growth. It gives language for, I just feel kind of funky about what happened, but I don't know what it is. And so to your point, you're saying, oh, I know what it is. I broke trust. And now I've got to do some repair and build that back up and make deposits back in there, because that was unknowingly and, unintentionally, it was a significant withdrawal. And now I've got to own it and I've got to step into it. And you're right on. Whether you do it directly or indirectly, it gets to be your call. And this is for all the listeners. I don't want anyone to feel like they got to rush out and have all their conversations about these 7 practices. Right. I want to release you from that and feel the freedom to understand this is about personal growth and it starts from within. And a lot of times we don't even say anything about it, but we know exactly what happened. I had a choice. I had a split-second choice there. And I'm either thinking Gen Z stuff or I'm low blood sugar. I know what I was teaching. I was like, I'm just hungry. And you caught me at the wrong moment and I'm hungry.
Yeah. It's a lot of people interaction when you teach. And I know you make the joke about sometimes you just needed to shut the door for your planning period. So I know you know what it is. And I teach a lot of courses in a row in a day. Yeah. And you kind of, you get a little bit off. Sometimes. But the other thing I'm trying to do in the classroom, Heather, and I don't know if you might even be able to weigh in on this just through your own experiences in the corporate, spaces and all the spaces you work in. In some of my classes, particularly like the women's and gender studies introductory class, I'm trying to get across the idea, and I'm saying it explicitly, that we can discuss things that are not personally linked with any of us. So I should feel free. I want to feel free to give an opinion, or not an opinion, to put out an idea and discuss it and not have the whole class think, oh, that's what she thinks. No, we're just discussing objectively. I want to have the freedom to jump to both sides. Let's try this idea. Let's try out that idea. Let's push back. And I don't want people to think, oh, that's exactly how she feels and she's trying to make me think that way. No, actually, I want to just explore ideas with the freedom of it not being personal. Yes. I don't know. Maybe you have advice. I would love any advice you have on.
Well, I love how you put it. I love how you said it. And then I would link it to gray space. I want to have the freedom to say it. And it's controlling when you go ahead and put me in a tiny box when I haven't even decided what I think about it. So I think here's what I'm learning is this is a really quick shortcut. Again, whether I'm working with educators or whether I'm working in leadership or circles or my own home, it's a shortcut to say, oh, hang on a minute. That is already starting to make me feel like I'm feeling controlled or I'm feeling like the defensiveness is hitting. And I think we all decided we want to be about gray space. I like to lead with, here's what gray space is. And that's why I lead with the example of the World War I scenario.
Yeah, I like that
in the book. And being able to say everybody has a choice. What I'm finding is majority, almost 99.9% of people say, I want to be a part of gray space. I'm exhausted from the fear and the intimidation. And so then what I call them out is saying, well, then you have to be able to not only commit to it, but you have to start engaging it and you have to work at it. You got to do your own work. Everybody carries their own gray space around with them. So then you're able to, you talk about objectivity, you're able to put it in a nice big container called gray space. You sell it, everyone, you pitch it, you sell it, everybody wants it. And then you say, okay, well, here's 7 ways to really start practicing it. So then you link it to one of the practices, whether it's, what you're mentioned. I love that. People have to be able, particularly in education spaces, feel like they're exploring an opinion, but they're not sold on it themselves. And they're not even sure what they think about it. But all of a sudden they shut down because the fact they even brought it up, everyone starts moving into accusation, number 2. And so then you're coaching the class to say, wait a minute, I'm hearing accusation. What I'd like to pivot us over to is questioning. And you'll notice that I use them as a juxtapose because we all do it, myself included. I'll start accusing and I go, oh, Heather, you don't want to accuse. Let's stay curious and ask questions. So you're helping them see that they have a choice. And the more we can live in that gray space choice, the better our world's going to be. It doesn't mean we don't ever do that other space, that other choice, but we want to be living the majority of our time there.
Well, and I think for me, I'm trained as an educator. I'm not trained as a psychologist, as a life coach, but I'm finding, just your comments right there, your advice is, I'm hearing, remember the students are people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if, as we're discussing, I can say explicitly all I want, let's talk objectively, but they may start to feel that accusation or that fear or that, oh, I better backtrack. And as an educator, I have to be aware that they're students, but they're also people. That's why I like in your book, your tips for responding and your ways to practice. Because see, that's an easy grab for me as a person who wants to apply your ideas, but don't have a PhD like you do in that area. And I'm not going to. I can't train, so I like those kind of pieces, which you're good at. I know your books, this is a feature of your books, that you want to make it so people can grab it and use it in different settings. But that's kind of what I'm hearing in the advice you were just saying right there is they're people. And even if I'm not a psychologist, I can grab some of these tips, some of these practices, share them even with the class, or at least I can pick up on when they might be taking something in as a person rather than just a student.
You're right on. And you're appealing to their free will and really their higher self. So what I'm realizing when I was working all these different spaces, it's like people were getting victimized by their own emotions. And I wanted to say, did you know you have a second, and it's a nanosecond. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a nanosecond, but did you know that you could actually reach for a question versus an accusation? And once I started putting that out there, you talk about empowering people. But because life is moving so quick, social media is not helping. People are on this trajectory to keep saying, I gotta quick react. I go, do you have to react or could you respond? I remember even coaching my own child. Her anxiety was going up at 15 or so. And I thought, what is happening? Well, if she was not responding to all the texts coming at her within seconds, we didn't grow up with text, right, Lisa? So I'm like,
right.
It was keeping her central nervous system like on this heightened state of fight or flight. And that's what a lot of people are living in, this fight or flight state. Yeah. And so they're living defensive, reactive, controlling, that they're stressed out, and they don't have anyone saying, you actually can take a beat here, and you can actually decide, actually, I don't really want to react to this. I want to respond to this.
And that's where your idea to be inquisitive and ask the next question actually creates that little delay.
Yes.
So if somebody says something, you respond with what you want to say, then that's done, right? But if you take a beat, like you say, and you ask a question, well, tell me more about that, or how did you develop this idea, or do you have an example? The minute you do that, there's a little more space. They get to talk a little more. You can take a breather, and that's something I can absolutely apply in the classroom. Is everybody, you can even say things like, think of one question, respond first with a question and then your comment. That's a lot of, actually, some of those tips are what people in higher education are using to create more civil discourse. They have studies and, classes of how you can learn that. So actually, that's a great, really practical step. If we lead with a question, it honors them, it allows them to speak a little more, and it gives everybody kind of a beat.
Yes. Take that beat. Yes.
No, that's great. Yeah, that's really good.
And I think it's also it's an easy catch-all to say, I'm going to commit to gray space. That's what I call everyone out to. I'm like, if you can just start with that. Myself, even, I sometimes can't remember all 7 of them, but I will go, wait a minute, I've committed to gray space. What does that mean in this moment? And that begins to be your new train of thought, instead of, I have to keep up with the next person, or I have to keep up with reacting to this world. My whole thing, you talk about freedom, I'm really going after free will and free choice and saying, you don't, guys. And I'm so sorry. We're getting inundated with so much aggression and violence and lack of civil discourse. I'd like us to pull it back and say, the more we can say, I'm committed to gray space, and I'm committed to working that out and doing my own work on that and carrying that with me, I believe our world will be a better place.
Well, and that phrase, I'm sure it either took you a while to come up with it, or it was developed over time, because gray space encapsulates all of that. And I like that, even in a classroom setting, or like you're saying, a family setting, because it is something you can commit to, because it does touch on values that we all hold in common, right? Yes. I mean, everyone wants to feel welcomed. Everyone wants to usually learn. I mean, we have moments where we don't want to learn. Yes. But, in general, we're hoping to grow as people. We don't want to be stuck. So gray space sort of holds all those values. And you're right. And you're making me think that even just talking to, because actually Wednesday of this week is my first class on one of the topics. We've just been doing introductory material. So you're making me think that maybe at that class, I've talked about it myself, but maybe I explicitly have everyone kind of weigh in on, can this be a gray space? What are the advantages to this in a classroom? What would a gray space look like for you? It's a nice tagline to kind of let people share what they're hoping for in any kind of relationship, be it in a classroom, a family dynamic, a work dynamic, a mentorship, whatever it might be.
Right. And it's that next level up from safe space. And I've always said, thank you for whoever created safe space. We needed more of those, but we can do better as a humanity. And even before the book was out, I had a friend who's the president of a nationwide organization. And I was teasing her, because she's like, we are already talking about that we are a company and association of gray space. And I kept saying, you haven't even read the book yet. She goes, I don't care. It gave me language to say we're a gray space. And I ended up having her endorse the book. And she literally got on the line with me and said, will you come in and do webinars? And will you do this? Because she'd already had committed to the fact we're gray space. I work with another company. We are a company of grace. They're still getting this permission to work it out. And as I coach these different leaders and employees and individuals, it's giving language where we didn't have it before. Safe space began to be a trigger word, right? It became more of this excuse to everyone go huddle in their safe space and kind of lob grenades at each other. And I'm like, when did we stop feeling safe in our world? And safe spaces isn't serving us anymore. I think we've outgrown it. And this awareness that everybody can be a part of creating gray space is what I get excited about.
Well, you're right. Language matters and words matter.
Yeah.
And that's what we've also been learning as educators, and as writers and as people, coaching. Words matter, phrases matter. But also, I think we can reach a point professionally and personally where we just have a lot of background that we can bring. And that's what I think for you, Heather, you've done so much in so many different settings. You've been an educator, you've been a life coach, you have a PhD, you've been a researcher, you can kind of bring all that together. So when you say gray space, people know you're bringing all of that forward for them. And that's why I think the book, is helpful for not just the theoretical pieces, but like I said, the tips, the practices. You're bringing all of that forward in gray space, and that's what I really like.
Great. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, sure.
Well, as we wrap up, I hear you have through the vine over here, I heard that you have a new morning ritual. My assistant said, make sure you ask her about your new morning ritual. I'm like, I can't wait. What are you doing in the morning?
Okay, I'm very proud of myself because this is not normal for me. So Heather, since you're kind of you're my life coach, because I'm reading your books and applying them. I have to drive from, I have about a 35, 40 maybe minute drive to work. It's probably only 25 without traffic, but every morning there's traffic. And basically I go from one highway, I cut down through kind of a canyon road, and I land on the Pacific Coast Highway right by the coast.
Yeah.
And the shortest way that I've been taking for, I don't know, 15 or more years at Pepperdine, the shortest way is the way everyone takes, and it's bumper to bumper, and it dumps me out right at Pepperdine, and I go right into my office, and that's that. I literally may not even see the beach or anything. And so a few months ago, I was like, I can't handle this bumper to bumper traffic. It's stressing me out. I'm like, there is a slightly, like maybe 5-minute longer way that dumps me up further. So it's a little bit longer, but there's never any cars. And then to get to Pepperdine, I actually take the Pacific Coast Highway for about 5 or 7 miles. So I actually drive along the ocean. And I'm like, but someone like me, I'm like, no, 5 minutes. I will not sacrifice those 5 minutes. Well, I grew, Heather.
Proud of you.
Grew enough, and I've been doing it for like 5 or 6 months now, and I love it because it's not bumper to bumper.
Yeah.
I dump out on the coast. I drive up the coast, and I get to work, and I'm like, why did it take me 15 years to figure this out? So,
I love
that's my new morning routine. Sacrificing 5 minutes for a much better internal state when I do get to that 8 a.m. class. So that's my new thing. So thank you. Thank you for encouraging me to make some interior space, some space within, so I can have some space between and some gray space for the students when I get there.
I love it. I love that you brought that up, because how we not only start our day, but you're right, how we create these own fostering and nurturing spaces with us. That's where we can cultivate it within ourselves so that we have something of worth to offer at, and not just
exactly
come running in. Oh, I love it.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lisa Smith. So fun to have you on my show, and I appreciate everything you're doing. Where can people find more out about you and get your books? Tell us a little bit about how to do that.
I have a website that I keep up. It's Lisa Ray Smith, and that's spelled RAE.com. So LisaRaySmith.com. I've got some books there, got a few podcasts, a little bit of stuff about my teaching. I have a link to some of the different things I've done. Like I created a virtual reality experience for the students and just different things like that. So if they can go to my website and find it all there.
Oh, so excited. I can't wait to read your Wakefield book. I know that just came out, right?
Thanks.
February 6th.
Yeah, February 6th, right. Yeah, just came out.
Oh, I love it. Well, thanks so much for just joining us today in the podcast, The Life You're Made For. I can see that you're living the life that you're made for. And
I'm trying, Heather.
Oh, you are. And thank you for creating your own spaces of grace around you. We're all doing it probably more than we realize, but if this book can help you articulate it more, I'm hoping it empowers people to be able to feel like they can join the conversation with us. So thanks.
Well, you
so
make
much.
it easy to do that. And I think that's why what I love about it is whatever field you're in or whatever your goals are, you can kind of grab pieces from that book. So thank you for it.
Oh, you're so welcome. All right. We're cheering you on. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We had such a great time today, and obviously we are all stepping into this life that we're made for, but isn't it nice to have a little bit of support along the way? If you want to find out more about the life that you're made for, come find me at heatherpenny.com. Go ahead and subscribe, give us a review. That really helps us out and helps spread the word. You get to step into the life that you're made for. Cheering you on.